Well, there's really no way to tell if someone's lying. So there's no way to spot deception. Say, oh, you're not telling the truth. And there's no such thing as the Pinocchio's nose of lying. No one sign that will tell you this person is not to be trusted. But we can learn to recognize some of the persuasive techniques that people might use to try to get us on their side. Unfortunately, it starts with getting us to like them. And so once you like someone, it's much more difficult to spot these things because you're already subjective. But how do people get you to like them? Well, we like people who are similar to us. And we like people who like the things we like. We like people who are familiar to us. You know, oh, I've seen you around, you know, I know who you are. And people who are trying to sell us something, be they con artists or just softer salespeople, they know this, and so they latch on to characteristics about us that are pretty apparent. You know, they might find out that I'm from the Boston area and say, oh, the Red Sox, try to see my reaction. Am I an avid Red Sox fan? If I am, the conversation will now go in that direction. All of a sudden we're bonding over baseball. This can't be a bad person. And now all of a sudden they're selling me something, but now from a very different point of view, from a point of view of a friend, of someone who's a buddy, of someone who's really cool, rather than the point of view of someone who's a salesperson.
The people who have been conned are still loath to believe that the person that they've been dealing with isn't the real deal. Why do we have so much difficulty actually believing the truth in these matters?
I think we've already invested so much emotionally into believing this, into believing it's true, and we've already rationalized away so many red flags that we want to keep on believing. We don't want people to tell us that we've been wrong, that we've been duped. We want to keep believing that we're very good judges of character and that we weren't taken in, that this really is the real thing. So you have cases of people who end up not just refusing to look at the evidence, but supporting con artists when they're on trial. There's one con artist I read about, Oscar Hartzell, who deceived hundreds of people over several decades, and he ended up on trial in the United States, and they paid his legal fees because even then they thought that he was innocent and that he was being taken advantage of, that it was a big government conspiracy so that they wouldn't get the money that he had promised them. And so he ended up having a defense that was paid for entirely by the victims.
Trust leads to good things. Right now, though, we're living in a very peculiar moment in time. We're living in a moment in time where generalized trust is actually on the decline, even in societies where traditionally it's been highest. So we're living in a world where we have this rise of populism, this distrust of facts. People are undermining the media, journalism. Expertise is no longer valued the way that it has been in the past. People, when I write something, distrust my job and say, fake news, hashtag fake news. So what do we do? How do we recapture trust, but do so in a way so that we're trusting in the right people and the right things, and not the wrong people and the wrong things? So I have a slightly non-traditional background. I'd like to call it one of the more creative uses of a psychology PhD in recent memory. So first, I spent a long time studying how people make decisions in the lab. Then I wrote about it. Then I spent a few years with con artists, figuring out how hope, how trust, how deception, how all of these things we're talking about today play out in the real world. And then I became a professional poker player. So I like to call it one of the best uses of a Harvard degree of all time. And it's actually arguably in that transition to the world of games that I've learned more about strategic decision making, about the nature of trust and distrust, than I have in years of research in a psychology lab. Poker is a really interesting game. If you trust too much, you are going to go broke so quickly, it's not even funny. People try to bluff you all the time. They try to bully you. At the poker table, everyone is always telling you stories about how strong they are, what an advantage they have over you. And guess what happens if you believe them every single time? you end up folding your best hand, and you end up losing. You can't sit around waiting for pocket aces, because if you do that, you'll be broke long before they come your way. And then when they do come your way, you're not going to be able to play them correctly. So this is definitely one situation where honesty is not the best policy. But the opposite end of the spectrum is just as bad if you distrust all the time. These are the players who think that everyone's out to get them, that everyone is bluffing, and that this time they're going to catch you. And so they keep on calling and calling and calling when they should be folding, and they end up just as broke as their overly trusting counterparts. The key to success is balance. It's being willing to observe and to adjust and to change your strategy according to who you're playing and how they're playing against you.
Let's amplify on this a bit, and to do that, I'll read another excerpt from your book. Here we go. We're calling this, It's Not Me, It's You. When it comes to ourselves, our traits, our lives, our decisions, our personal attachment overshadows our objective knowledge. We systematically misevaluate evidence based on our own characteristics. And if we're given evidence that something about us poses a threat, instead of thinking about how to change our own behavior, we call the evidence itself into question. To put this in conning terms, if I paint a picture of a perfect mark for you and you recognize yourself in it, you are more likely to think I'm a poor researcher than yourself a target. Nah, you'll say, those aren't actually the things that get someone conned. I bet this girl didn't do any research and is just constructing this out of thin air. We seem to have a real problem changing our behavior and getting ourselves to recognize what's really happening here.
How many of you have actually taken the time to sit down with yourself and ask, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? What do I want to believe? Who do I trust? What makes me tick? We are not very good at asking ourselves those questions, but you know who is? Con artists. They ask those questions about us so that they know what our buttons are, they know what our beliefs are, they know exactly how to sell what they want to sell to us. And so it never hurts to take a moment, take an hour, or take a day and actually practice that sort of mindful technique. In poker, it can be the difference between winning and losing, figuring out what your triggers are, what tilts you, what makes you emotional, how do you respond to different things. When you know yourself, you make much better decisions. The greatest game theorist of all time, Sun Tzu, said, know your enemy and know yourself, and you not need fear the result of 1,000 battles. So take that time and actually get to know what you hope, what you want to hope in, what you want to believe. And I think you'll be surprised to see that the trust that you thought you lost is being reborn in a sense. Ricky Jay, the great magician and also a student of the con, once gave an interview to the New York Times where he said that he wouldn't actually want to be the type of person who couldn't be conned. I would not want to live in a world where we can't be conned, he said, because that would be a world where we couldn't trust in anyone or anything. And that doesn't really seem like a world worth living in. So let's bond together and try to build one that is.
People who are trying to persuade us, whether they're con artists, whether they're business people, whether they're salespeople, whether they're politicians, they really key in on the human desire to say yes, and the fact that we often just don't want to exit a situation because we don't know how. We don't know how to get out of it and still feel like good people, still maintain our dignity.